أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. You all know what it means when a speaker takes his watch off before speaking, right? It means nothing actually, absolutely nothing. Said Mudarrisi today morning was telling us about La Adri, if you recall. I don't know. The joke is in Iran there was a visitor who went there who was very, very clever, highly intellectual, and he challenged the Iranians to a debate or discussion. He says, I know all the answers. And all the Iranians were very scared, apart from one mullah, Mullah Nasruddin. He said, I will take on this challenge. And the people said, Mullah, you can barely read or write. The best scholars in Iran are scared of this guy. How can you do it? Mullah says, just one question. I will ask him one question. If he doesn't know the answer, I won. If he knows the answer, he has won. He said, fine. So there was a big gathering held and the judges were there, and Mullah says, just one question I ask you, what does Namiduna mean? Now for those who do not know, Namiduna in Farsi means I don't know. So Mullah asked the guy, and the visitor said, I don't know. And the Mullah says to the judge, he doesn't know, I won, I'll ask him again, what does Namiduna mean? And he says, I don't know. The judge says, Mullah, you're right, you've won, just great, how did you do it? The Mullah says, I can barely read or write, but one day I was going through this dictionary and I came across this word Namiduna, and to my amazement, even the dictionary did not know. It says, I don't know. So I said, if the dictionary doesn't know, even he won't know. Anyway, that's just to wake you guys up a little bit. We're talking about 9/11 and the Shi'a image in America in particular. Before I get to that main topic, I think we need to understand that the media is not monolithic. There are different nuances, different kinds of media with different agendas. And I want to talk a little bit about an aspect of the media that we barely give much importance to, that is cartoons, or they call it in England cartoons. Cartoons communicate briefly, visually rather than through reading, that is by seeing something, and often cartoons use symbols and expect the reader to know what the symbol means. And symbols are very important, by the way. Certain symbols we all recognize, some others we do not. For example, when we see VW, we know it means Volkswagen. When we see, for example, RR, it means Rolls-Royce. I was reading this book called Islamophobia, and I was interested to see that the concept of croissant, you know the croissant, right, that you eat. You know what the shape looks like? It's a crescent. Who uses the symbol of crescent? Muslims do. Where does it come from? You may have wondered. Well, believe it or not, on September 11, 1683, September 11, 1683, the Ottomans were defeated at the outskirts of Vienna. They were trying to capture Vienna. They had actually besieged Vienna, and they were defeated. In response to and to show the supremacy of the Viennese, if you like, or the Austrians over the Muslims, they baked a bread in the shape of a croissant, or the shape of a crescent to be exact. And we eat that croissant not even knowing that it's actually a way of showing the supremacy or the victory of the Austrians over the Muslims in 1683. Now that's just one theory, but that goes to show how symbols work. We're not even aware of that. However, one effective way that cartoons use is to stereotyping. Stereotype means to put a group in a pre-assigned role or a pre-assigned way. And they try to show that this group has characteristics which is different from us. We are the good ones, this group is the bad ones, or they are different. For example, whenever you see African Americans in movies, in most cases, or even in the media, they symbolize those who are impoverished or criminals. Mexicans, especially in the Westerns, are those who are banditos or illegal. Similarly, whenever you see an FBI agent, for example, most commonly he is white, he is male, of course, or doctors or lawyers, etc. They are white, Anglo-Saxons, and so on. To give you an impression of how the media works in a very subtle way, and many a time these subtleties escape us. There is a film called The Siege. Now, I have not seen the film, but what I was reading about it was, in The Siege you have two Muslims. One good Muslim and one not so good Muslim. And who is the good Muslim? He is an FBI agent. And who is the bad Muslim? A terrorist. Fine. So you have two Muslims in the movie, one good, one not bad. But there is one certainly important point. The FBI agent who is a Muslim, whenever he acts, he does not invoke or does not do anything connected with Islam. He doesn't pray, doesn't fast, doesn't say anything. Whereas the terrorist Muslim in the movie, whenever he's about to engage in any act of terror, the first thing he does is say, Allahu Akbar. Or he prays, or he does wudu, and so on. What is the message that is being portrayed? That a good Muslim is the invisible Muslim. And the bad Muslim is one who invokes Islam in his acts of terror. To put it differently then, wudu and salat become symbols of terrorism in the minds of the audience. Cartoonists also define what Muslims are not and what Muslims should be like. In other words, the media is telling us that in order for Muslims to be good, they need to reform so that they endorse and reflect our values. Cartoons also use caricatures. What is a caricature? It's a focus of a feature of an individual, and sometimes that feature is exaggerated. For example, you'll see a cartoon of a prolonged nose, you know. A politician who is shrewd or not liked often has a prolonged nose. Often also, of course, a bomb symbolizing a Muslim. What is even worse is that these caricatures become stereotypes when they depict the entire group who have that particular feature. Another example, a very famous one, was the Danish cartoons. Now we all heard about it, we've all seen about it. By the way, it is not haram, it is not prohibited to depict the Prophet or the Imams. It's not haram to do that. In fact, historically, Muslims have drawn more pictures of the Prophet than non-Muslims have. As long as you don't say that the Prophet looked like this or the Imam looked like this, you go to Iran and you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see pictures of Imam Ali, Imam Hussein there, and even the Prophet many a time, especially during Mi'raj. But what was problematic about the cartoon was not that they depicted the Prophet. What was problematic was that it was A, caricature, B, a symbol. The symbol was the turban in a bomb. Was it a bomb in a turban? I can't even remember now. And also it symbolized the fact that the Prophet himself was violent. And stereotyping it that all Muslims who are the followers of this Prophet, therefore, are also violent. That was, I think, most offensive. And my colleague here, Professor Vernon Chubal, was one of those who wrote a lot about this, I recall, on the Islam AAR group, on the listserv, about the problems with the cartoons. Cartoons then run from being just a symbol to becoming a stereotype, whereby the entire group is subsumed under that particular symbol and that particular message. Interestingly also, and again we miss out these nuances many a time, the media and especially the cartoon, they actually accentuate the idea of the fact that Muslim women are oppressed. And therefore the only time that you will see Muslim women in cartoons is when they are under the veil or they are oppressed or something like that. In many ways the image that the cartoons give is that is a gendered image. Gendered image means a fanatical Muslim man countered by an oppressed Muslim woman. What is also problematic is that cartoons, like the other media, lump Muslims together. When was the last time you saw a Muslim in a picture or movie or a cartoon who is American Muslim? Most of the time when you look at the media, the Muslim who is portrayed in the media is Pakistani or Arab or Iranian. Thankfully not Tanzanians. They don't think that there are Muslims in Tanzania, but there are, and I'm one of them. But seriously though, the point is they will never show an American Muslim who is well-dressed, who is a CEO or who is working for NASA, etc. Because that will destroy the stereotype that they are trying to portray. And consequently, it becomes important for us as Muslims not only to enter the media, but also to draw cartoons. We have great artists too, you know, and we can do it too. We need to show that we challenge this idea of sameness in stereotypes. You see what stereotypes do? They depict a monolithic picture. sameness, that all Muslims are the same. And whenever they depict Christians, for example, they try to show the nuances or the differentiation, diversity within the Christian tradition. And we need to show also that Islam is not monolithic. Muslims are not univocal, they are multivocal. We need to emphasize the diversity and the different voices within Islam. It is also important for us to remember that when we talk of this Islamophobia, the fact that the West is against Islam, etc., we've heard so many times, we need to understand where the roots come from. Islamophobia or negative images of Islam is nothing new. They come right from the beginning of Islam itself. A couple of months ago, Maulana Faizi invited me graciously to speak at his center in Chicago and to talk about how, historically, how the West has projected and looked at Islam. I'm 53 years old, I don't mind saying that, but when I was preparing for that speech, I came across a word that I had never ever heard of. And I don't believe that you have, or most of you have not. It's called mammetry. Google it. M-A-M-M-E-T-R-Y. M-A-M-M-E-T-R-Y. Mammetry. What does the word mammetry mean? It means actually idol worship, to worship idols. Okay, so what's the big deal? The big deal is if you look at the history, the etymology of the word. Where does it come from? If you Google it, it'll tell you that the etymology of the word mammetry is Muhammad. Muhammad, idol worship, nothing to do with it. But in the olden days, they associated Muslims with worshipping Muhammad in the form of an idol. That is how it all started. In fact, the history of Islamophobia, if you like, or negative depictions of Islam come right at the beginning, as I said, and most prominently in the name of one person called John of Damascus, who actually died around, who was born around 662, soon after Imam Ali died. And this John of Damascus actually worked in Damascus, according to some reports, for the Umayyad court. And he starts talking about Muslims and the Prophet as an impostor. And after that, there's a whole series of anti-Islamic literature, most of it based on ignorance. And I don't have the time to go through all this. But it's important for us to remember the long history of how the West has projected Islam negatively. One way, interestingly, is how they distorted the death of the Prophet. According to the West, in the medieval literature, I'm not talking of now, the Prophet died in the year 666. He actually died in 632. Historically, he died in 632. Why 666? Because the book of the Apocalypse says that there will be 666 beasts in the Apocalypse. In other words, they try to associate the Prophet with a beast. Another major misconception, and we need to challenge them, we need to explain to them, was that the reason why the Muslims are against pigs and pork is because, na'udhu billah, that the Prophet was actually devoured and eaten by pigs. We know that's not true. But this is just how the history of the negative depictions of Islam. The problem with stereotypes also is this, that the other within the other is hidden. In America, Muslims are the other, whereas the Shias are the other within the other. And therefore we become minoritized within the minority, sometimes within the minority. At this point, if I can be excused of some self-advertisement, but I wrote a book recently called Shi'ism in America, the only book of its kind. It looks at the history of the Shia community. By the way, most scholars up to date, up to recent time, whenever they've talked about Islam in America, they mean Sunnism in America. They don't write about Shias. Because why? Because we Shias do not write about ourselves. So I look at the whole history of the Shia community in America. I look at some of the contemporary manifestations of the Shia community in America. I examine the Shia-Sunni relationship. But importantly, I also talk about 9/11 and the Shia image. How Muslims have reacted, and the Shia community in particular, has reacted to the events of 9/11. Before 9/11, there was integration between Muslims and non-Muslims, but it was limited. In many ways, 9/11, the horrendous events of 9/11 forced Muslims to adapt to the American milieu, to make themselves comprehensible. In many ways, since 9/11, Muslims have become in a state of transition. Before we were Muslims living in America, now we are becoming American Muslims. And there is a difference between Muslims living in America to becoming American Muslims. And we are in the state of transition. In many ways, this is a silent revolution that many Muslims have been engaged in since 9/11. Why? Because Muslims have realized it's not only our Islamic identity that is at stake, it's also our American identity. We are Muslims and we are Americans too. Let's not forget that. And we have realized that if we forget or do not challenge this American identity issue, then we could become strangers in our own adopted homeland. Muslims have also tried to create an American civic identity. In other words, Muslims have also engaged in many civic responsibilities and duties since 9/11. It's very interesting that soon after 9/11, CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, published an advert in a major newspaper, I remember, and it was a picture of a Muslim woman, properly in hijab, and what was important was what it said underneath it. It says, I'm an American, I'm a Muslim. I'm an American, I'm a Muslim. What was interesting for me was that the American came before the Muslim. I'm an American, I'm a Muslim. Muslims engaged in food drives to help the homeless and so on. The mosques were opened suddenly, and Muslims became more patriotic. There were American flags flying outside the mosques, Muslim houses, on Muslim cars. 9/11 made Muslims realize that it is important to speak with rather than about the other. We have moved. We have moved in our conversion and conversation. We have realized, Muslims have realized that it is more important to converse with rather than convert the other. That we have to engage in dialogue. Importantly also, since 9/11, Muslims have engaged in what I call the indigenization process. Indigenization means to consider Islam as an indigenous phenomenon, not something coming from the outside. That we are, as Americans, as Jews or Christians or any other group. Indigenization of American Islam is the process of identifying, understanding, relating to the culture, heritage, and the history of America too. Indigenization also means carving out a space for oneself in American society, being more appreciative of American values while remaining authentic to Islam. For many Muslims, they think you can either be American or a Muslim. You can't be both. No, you can be both. You can be American and you can be a Muslim at the same time. Just to show you some of the, how Muslims still think, the back home mentality. It is said that one Indian Muslim went for a citizenship test. You go for the interview, etc. And one of the questions that you are asked, and one of the questions he was asked was, name an Indian tribe. And his response was Punjabi. But that just goes to show, no, it's Navajo or Cherokee and so on. An essential element then in this indigenization of American Islam is the identification with American culture and values. And that Muslims need to distance themselves from this back home mentality. Indigenization also means viewing American culture as a challenge rather than a threat. When we look at something as a threat, we feel scared. When we see something as a challenge, we want to interact with it. 9/11 also made Muslims into conflict with one another. It has created boundaries. It created boundaries not only between Muslims and non-Muslims, but between Muslims themselves. Why? Because many Muslims realize that this majority silent Muslim syndrome has to end. The majority silent Muslim syndrome has to end, and that a Muslim indifference in America has encouraged an extremist expression within America. And whether we like to admit it or not, there are extremists within our midst. That many extremists have spoken on behalf of Islam before 9/11. And that before 9/11, the voices of the silent majority were drowned by the violence of the vocal minority. The voices of the silent majority were drowned by the violence of the vocal minorities. It is here, I think, that we have to understand how we Shias have to play a role. One of the things that you find in the media is, or even on television many a time, they compare. What do they compare? They compare their ideals with our realities. If we must compare, we can compare ideals with the ideals, the realities with the realities. But what the media often does is to compare the ideals with the reality. Look how they compare, look at the Quran. And Jerry Falwell said about this, the Quran is a violent book, and you hear these statements again and again, how violent the Quran is. Duh, have you ever heard of this book called the Old Testament? Yeah? I asked my students, what's the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament? And they said one is old, the other one is new. But there's a more subtle difference than that. The Old Testament has got more violence, far more violence than the Quran has. Many of us are not even aware of that. For example, we always told that Muslim women are oppressed. You've heard about it so many times. But the traditional Orthodox Jewish prayer, which is stated, which is recited by many Orthodox Jews every day. You want to know what the dua the Jews recite, the Orthodox Jews is? Oh God, thank you for not making me a woman. Now, how many Muslims ever say that? Huh? I don't see the dua, just thank you for not making. Needless to say, Jewish women do not recite that. That's an Orthodox Jewish prayer. Thank God for not making me a woman. The book of Deuteronomy will find that God tells the Israelites to kill the inhabitants of Canaan, to kill everybody, and so on. Where does the Quran say that you kill everybody? On the contrary, as we are aware, the Quran says that you kill one human being, one innocent human being, you've killed the whole of humanity. So it's important for us to make them realize what's hidden in their closets, which they don't want us to realize. They don't even know it themselves. 9/11 also obliterated distinctions between Muslims. Initially, at least, all Muslims were extremists, were terrorists, and so on, jihadis. They even used the term crusade, if you remember, George Bush used. What that did was included us Shias as perpetrators of the events of 9/11. Even though we never had any part or any role to play, Shias became guilty by religious association. However, after some time, the image changed, especially after the invasion of Iraq. Most Americans started realizing the distinction between Shias and Sunnis. In fact, Americans know about Shiism and Shia far more now than they ever known in their history. If you recall, Sayyid Mahdi Mudarrisi said something very interesting today morning, when he said that when you Google, I believe, if I remember it correctly, the term Shia, where is it Google most, you find that most of the time the term Shia is Googled in America first, then Canada, and so on. So there are more Americans or Canadians who want to know about Shia Islam than, for example, Iranians or Iraqis. Before, all Muslims are Muslims. Now, of course, Americans know the distinction between Shia and Sunni. Immigration officers know about it too. They know about Karbala, Mashhad, and Iraq and Iran, and so on. The media marginalizes the minority. The minority voices are unheard. It is therefore important for us, as the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, to define ourselves. Let me make it very clear. If you do not define yourself, others will define you in America. If you do not carve your own space and draw your own boundaries, others will do that. And who are the others? Fox News, CNN, and so on. It is time that as followers of the Ahlul Bayt, we speak. Because, ironically enough, in the West, we have more opportunity and more freedom to speak than in most Muslim countries. You go in most Muslim countries, we are scared to identify ourselves, but we are more free here than anywhere else. I've discovered in my own field that more and more universities want Shia studies now. In fact, with the exception of just a few here, there are very few Shia professors teaching Islam. And yet, as I've discovered, more and more university students want to know about Shia Islam. Chairs on Shia Islam have to be established. We have chairs established by Prince Walid, for example, Umar al-Khattab chair in Islam. We do not have an Ali ibn Abi Talib chair in Islam. We do not have a Fatima al-Zahra chair in Islam. Why? Because the country which has most populated by Shias, Iran, has yet to take that initiative. It doesn't take much, by the way, to establish a chair in a university, which is permanent. $1 million, $1 million, which frankly is not that much. The point is, we Shias prefer to preserve rather than extend our boundaries. Because we are in the minority, we have that mindset that we just need to look after ourselves and we are okay. We are not okay anymore. We need to reach out and use the media. We have two main television channels, at least are ones I get. Salam TV and Ahlul Bayt. Most of you have heard of those, right? And when I look at them, okay, it's great, at least we are getting Shiaism exposed on television. But frankly speaking, I'm disappointed. Because those programs, the programs that we see, are meant to the converted or for the converted, not for non-Muslims. Many of those programs actually are brought straight from the masajids and the maragis, the Islamic centers. I'm thinking, well, if I'm a non-Muslim looking at this program, will I really be attracted to Shia Islam because of this? And frankly, no. Frankly, no. When I see people beating their chests, etc., and crying all the time, said, is this really what I want? As a non-Muslim, I'm talking of. In other words, what I'm saying is that we need to create programming which will attract and reach out to non-Muslims. This is the whole purpose of creating a television program on the air, isn't it? Because we all see, when we all hear these lectures in the mosques and all these interviews. But when it's on public air, we have to be very careful of what we say and the image that we project to others. Now, as I say, increasingly there is more interest in Shia Islam. There are two journals which are focused only on Shia Islam. Most of us, we don't even know about them, we don't even read them. The Journal of Shia International Studies is published in England, and there's another journal called Shia Affairs also that I'm aware. Academy of Religion. And this year in particular, believe it or not, there are over 7,000 scholars who come to that annual conference. It's going to be held in Atlanta in end of October. This year, for the Islam section, they have expressively stated that they want more papers and more presentations on Shia Islam. And most of those who will be presenting will not be even Muslims, or if they are Muslims, they are not Shias. One or two Shias that I know who are presenting at the AAR. 9/11 exposed the true terrorists. Before 9/11, most Americans could not even spell, let alone understand the term Wahhabis. But yet every time or everywhere I go and speak, they ask me, tell us something about these Wahhabis. Tell us more about this. Now Wahhabism is on the tip of their tongues. In many ways, many Americans have realized that Shiism presents a more moderate branch. And I'm not saying, by the way, that Sunnis are all fundamentalists. I'm not saying that at all. I know most Ahlul Sunnah friends of mine are very moderate. But we have this extremist and terroristic branch within Ahlul Sunnah called the Wahhabism. What is also interesting that most Americans have now realized that the fundamentalist movements do not have Shiism within them. Most of these, and I know that we have problems using the word fundamentalism, but I don't have the time to go into that. But most of the fundamentalist movements which are actually established and thriving in America, whether it is Wahhabism, whether it is the Hizb al-Tahrir, the Tablighis, Ikhwan, Jamaat al-Islam, and others which do not thrive here but are still there, Al-Qaeda and so on, are not Shiis at all. Still there, Al-Qaeda and so on, are not Shiis at all. There is no fundamentalist movement within Shia Islam, and there's a particular reason behind that also, I believe. One of them is that there is a religious vacuum in Sunni Islam, a religious vacuum which is filled by the scholars, by the Maraji in Shia Islam, who do not allow the terroristic or militant expression of Islam. In my book I make it very clear, and I have cited many sources whereby the Maraji have expressly forbidden the killing of innocent civilians anywhere in the world, not only in America, by the way. Our voices have been drowned. I've always believed that Muslims should act together, Muslims should unite. However, when we are not given the opportunity, the space to present our case, to speak our minds, then we have to do it ourselves. Because if you expect that CARE, ISNA, MPAC will speak on behalf of the Shi'is, then forget it. Forget it. MSAs, Muslim Student Association, do not want to know you if you are not one of them. If you are Shia. In the past it was different. When the Muslim Student Association was created in Illinois in 1963, the president was a Shia. Out of the first 4 presidents, 3 of them were Shias. We got along fine. Things started changing in the 1970s because of the Wahhabis, of course. And gradually and surely, Muslims or Shia Muslims got excluded from many Muslim institutions. In fact, when friends of mine actually approached CARE, said, well, why don't we have a Shia, or just one Shia person on board of CARE? Nothing doing. And so on. As I said, I do believe in unity, but I also believe that Shias have to have their voices heard. There is widespread, you may not be aware of this, you will read, I don't want to promote my book too much, but you will read examples in this. There is widespread discrimination against Shia Muslims on the MSAs, in the prisons, in the masajid, to the extent that one masjid in Texas had a notice outside saying, no Shias allowed. No Shias allowed in a mosque. So therefore this is a Sunni mosque. It's God's mosque. However, as I said, we as the followers of Ahlul Bayt now have to extend rather than merely preserve our boundaries. Unfortunately, most of the masajid, most of our Islamic centers, Shia centers, have no budget for tabligh or for da'wah, have no budget for public relations. The time has come when we have to realize that Islam 101 is no longer needed. I have spoken to our fellow Shias in Dearborn, Michigan, and what they told me is that we have moved on from our discourse. For a long time, Shias and Sunnis used to go together. It was primarily the dialogue was done by Sunnis and a few Muslims, Shia Muslims here or there. But now the Shias have realized that we have to speak. If we can talk about Aisha, we can also talk about Fatima to Zahra, we can also talk about Zainab. It is now the Shias who are talking about the Shia heroes and Shiros also. If we can have a hero, we can also have a Shiro, right? If we can have a his story, we can also have a her story too. So, and Shia Muslims in particular, Shi'is are full of women role models. No longer are Americans asking why Muslim women are oppressed or why do they hate us. Now they want to know different subjects. They want to know what Islam says about abortion, about homosexuality, about free will and predestination and so on. And in many ways, the Dearborn Shias, to me, are a model. If you go to Dearborn, you'll find Shia councillors, Shia mayors, Shias on almost every public scene that you can think of. And in many ways, we need to replicate that. I think my time is running short. And 1 or 2 points before I finish. To start with, also Shia women, our sisters. They need to represent and talk about Islam. In most cases, you do not find Muslim women, at least Shia women, talking about Shiism. Very few of them. The way that Shia women can talk about women, we men cannot talk. We need to move now from our women being sisters in Islam to becoming colleagues in Islam. That they should talk about Islam and they can talk better about women's issues than we men can. We as Muslims, and Shia Muslims in particular, have to end our self-imposed marginalization. The fact that we are marginalized is self-imposed. 9/11 has given us the opportunity to challenge the myth of a homogeneous and static Muslim world. We have an opportunity to show the rainbow nature of Islam. You know what's a rainbow nature? A rainbow has got different colors, diverse colors. And Islam also is diverse. And it's up to us to show that Islam is not monolithic, Islam is not this, but what Islam truly is. We need to move from being the other within the other to becoming a more visible and vocal minority group in America. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.